Anti-Mage. The mountain air was crisp and thin, a biting cold that could strip away the thoughts of those not disciplined enough to still their minds. But for the monks of Kuri, the elements were of little concern. Perched high above the chaos of the world, the monastery had stood for centuries, an untouched bastion of peace and quietude. The monks who dwelled there had long since abandoned all desires, all worldly attachments, devoting themselves solely to the practice of meditation and the rejection of magic gods, and any force they deemed a distraction from true enlightenment. To the young pilgrim who had journeyed far to reach this sacred place, the monastery was a promise fulfilled. He had walked for weeks, his feet bloodied and blistered from the rough terrain, driven by the hope that within these stone walls he would find the peace that had eluded him for so long. The moment he crossed the threshold, his heart had filled with something he hadn't known he was missing: serenity. The monks, their faces calm and unmoved by the hardships of the world, had become his idols. He watched them in awe as they sat, hour after hour, in silent contemplation. It was a kind of stillness he craved, a reprieve from the chaos and violence that had consumed the kingdoms below. For months, the acolyte served the monks humbly. He fetched water from the icy streams, prepared simple meals of nettles and roots, and carried tea to the elder monks who rarely moved from their meditation chambers. He was not yet allowed to join them in their ascetic practices, but that only fueled his desire. He wanted nothing more than to be part of their world, to be free from the madness that lay beyond the mountains. Yet, despite the calmness that surrounded him, the acolyte could not entirely quiet his mind. Whispers had reached him, carried on the winds from the lower kingdoms. Rumors of war, of a darkness that was spreading across the land like wildfire. Entire armies had fallen, cities reduced to ash, but it wasn't merely conquest that gripped the world. There was something more insidious at work. The monks, however, were unmoved. To them, the wars of men were fleeting, insignificant ripples in the vast ocean of existence. Their focus was inward, and they paid no mind to the struggles of those below. But as the days passed, the acolyte's unease grew. It was in the way the birds no longer sang in the valleys, in the way the wind seemed to carry a distant wail that never ceased. His dreams had grown dark, filled with shadows and a presence that pressed on his chest like a weight he could not shake. The monks continued their silent meditations, but the acolyte could not ignore the sense that something was coming. And when the legion of the dead god arrived, his fears became reality. The dead god's forces did not announce their presence with the blare of trumpets or the beat of war drums. They came silently, like a creeping death, their approach hidden beneath a shroud of magic, so dark it seemed to smother the light from the sky. The first the acolyte knew of their presence was a tremor in the earth, a subtle vibration that coursed through the stone beneath his feet. When he looked to the horizon, the valleys that had once been so clear were now lost in a haze of smoke and shadow. The wind that blew from the lower kingdoms was no longer cold. It was burning. The monks remained unmoved, even as the acolyte's heart began to pound in his chest. He rushed to the temple's elders, begging them to see the danger, to prepare for what was coming. But they dismissed him with the same calm detachment they showed to everything. These invaders, they said, were mere distractions. Visions sent to test their focus, their devotion to the path of enlightenment. The world below was nothing but illusion, and the dead god's crusaders were no different. The acolyte tried to argue, tried to make them see the truth, but their faith was unshakable. And so he watched helpless, as the storm descended upon the monastery. The attack came swift and brutal. The walls of Kuri, which had stood for centuries, crumbled under the assault of dark magic. The dead god's soldiers were not men. They were twisted, animated corpses, torn from the earth and bound by necromantic forces that defied all reason. The acolyte stood frozen as he saw the monks, the very men he had admired, cut down where they sat in meditation. They did not scream. They did not fight. They died silently, believing to the very end that what they saw was nothing but a dream. But the nightmare was real. The bodies of the fallen monks, once serene in their stillness, were twisted into mockeries of life. The same dark magic that had decimated the monastery now reanimated their corpses, bending their limbs into grotesque forms, their empty eyes now burning with an unnatural light. They had become part of the dead god's legion, soldiers bound to serve in death as they never had in life. The acolyte could not stay. His heart raced as he grabbed what few possessions he could, a handful of scrolls, the teachings of the monastery's ancient dogma, and fled into the night. Behind him, the screams of the undead echoed through the mountains, but he did not look back. He couldn't. The weight of guilt pressed down on him, making every step heavier than the last. How could he have survived when so many had fallen? Why had he been spared when those he had admired were now nothing but puppets of the very force they had refused to acknowledge? He ran for days, the cold biting at his skin, the landscape blurring into an endless haze of snow and rock. But no matter how far he went, he could not escape the images that haunted his mind. The monks rising from their deathbeds, their faces twisted into something no longer human. It was then, in his darkest moment, that the acolyte made his vow. Magic had done this. Magic had twisted the world into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. It wasn't just the dead god's necromancy. It was all magic. Every spell, every incantation, every sorcerer who dared to bend the natural order had played a part in this destruction. Magic was the true enemy, the root of all suffering, and it had to be eradicated. The acolyte's journey had only just begun. In the shadows of forgotten places he trained. The scrolls he had taken from the monastery became his guide, though not in the way they had been intended. Where the monks had sought enlightenment, the acolyte sought something far darker. He honed his body into a weapon, each muscle, each movement, designed for one purpose: to destroy magic. His mind, once so eager to find peace, became a blade, cutting through the illusions of mercy and compassion. He could no longer afford such luxuries, not in a world tainted by sorcery. The acolyte was no longer the boy who had sought refuge in the monastery. He had become something else. He had become the Anti-Mage. He fashioned his own weapons, twin blades designed not just to kill, but to sever the connection between magic and the world. They were forged in secret, using techniques he had learned from ancient scrolls, their edges honed to a deadly sharpness. With these blades, he cut through the armies of sorcerers and necromancers that still plagued the lands, each strike weakening the flow of arcane energy around him. He had become a ghost, moving through the battlefield with a cold, calculated efficiency. No spell could touch him. No sorcerer could stand against him. But the war against magic was far from over. The further he traveled, the more he realized that magic's grip on the world was deeper than he had ever imagined. It was woven into the very fabric of existence, corrupting everything it touched. He fought, day after day, but the more he destroyed, the more magic seemed to spring up in its place. And then one night, he found himself standing at the edge of a great abyss, the void. It was an ancient force, one that existed outside of time and space, a place where magic had no hold. The void called to him, offering him power, not through magic, but through its antithesis. It was a force that could unravel spells, tear them apart at the seams. The Anti-Mage accepted its gift, and with it, his power grew. He could feel the magic around him weakening with every step he took, the arcane energy dissolving like mist under the heat of the sun. But even as he grew stronger, the nightmares of Terstar never left him. He was haunted by the faces of the monks, twisted and broken, their eyes burning with that terrible light. No matter how many sorcerers he killed, no matter how much magic he destroyed, he could never escape the memory of their fall. And deep down, he knew that the dead god was still out there, waiting, watching. It was during one of these sleepless nights that rumors began to reach him, rumors of a great war brewing in the east. A war between two ancient forces, radiant and dire, whose conflict threatened to consume the entire world. The Anti-Mage wanted no part of it. He had his own war to fight, his own mission to fulfill. But something about the rumors gnawed at him, pulling at the edges of his mind. The ancients were stirring, and their war was unlike any the world had seen. It was not just a battle for land or power. It was a battle for existence itself. Magic would play a central role in this conflict, and though the Anti-Mage tried to distance himself, something deep within him knew that he could not avoid this fight forever. A dark omen had appeared to him, a vision of the future where magic consumed everything, leaving only ruin in its wake. And in that vision, he stood at the center of it all, his blades drawn, caught between forces far greater than himself. The war was coming, and whether he liked it or not, the Anti-Mage would be forced to choose a side. Would he stand with the Radiant, who sought to protect the natural order, or with the Dire, who sought to reshape the world in their image? It was a question he did not yet know the answer to, but one thing was certain. His battle against magic was far from over, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever.